They came without warning. A fleet of silver-hulled ships, vast and ancient, drifted into orbit above Earth. No weapons were visible. No threats were issued. Only a transmission, clear and resonant, broadcast in every language known to man. We are the HRA. We bring protection. The message played on every screen, echoed through every speaker. Governments scrambled, militaries mobilized, but the HRA did not advance. They simply waited. And when humanity finally responded, the visitors sent envoys, tall, luminous beings with eyes like burning gold. Their voices hummed with something beyond sound, something that pressed into the mind like a whisper from the cosmos. They spoke of danger, an approaching force beyond comprehension, a threat that had erased countless civilizations, consuming entire empires without leaving a trace. Earth, they warned, had drawn its attention. The HRA had come to protect. World leaders gathered, debating behind closed doors. Some were eager to accept the offer. After all, these beings had crossed the stars effortlessly, their knowledge and technology dwarfing anything humanity had achieved. But others hesitated. Protection at what cost? The first meeting between human diplomats and HRA envoys took place in Geneva. The halls of the UN swarmed with reporters and security personnel, all watching as the alien delegation stepped forward. Their leader, a being who called itself Aristava, bowed respectfully. "The time is short," it said, voice rippling with a strange harmony. "We must act now. Your species must be shielded." The Secretary General of the UN nodded slowly. "You claim there's a threat coming for us, something that has destroyed others before. But you've yet to answer the most important question." Aristava's gaze flickered. "Ask it." The man leaned forward. "Protection from what?" Silence stretched, thick and unyielding. The HRA delegation shifted, a hesitation so slight that only the most observant noticed. Aristava's golden eyes dimmed. "It is better that you do not know," it finally said. A murmur rippled through the chamber. The U.S. ambassador narrowed his eyes. "That's not good enough. You arrive unannounced, warn us of some unseen danger, and expect blind obedience? Earth doesn't work that way." A flicker of something anxiety crossed the alien's face. "We have seen this before," Aristava said. "Countless worlds brilliant and thriving, all lost. We came to them as we come to you, but they did not listen. They asked questions as you do. They demanded answers as you do. And in the end, their voices fell silent. The tension in the room thickened. The Russian delegate leaned forward. "How?" The HRA leader's voice wavered. "We do not speak of it." That was the breaking point. Humanity was not a species of cowards. If there was a threat, they would face it. If the HRA wanted trust, they would have to earn it. The president of France exhaled sharply. "We cannot agree to your offer until we know the truth." Aristava's fingers curled inward, the first visible sign of frustration. This is not a negotiation. Every moment spent in debate places your world at greater risk. The Chinese delegate leaned forward, then explained why. A pause, a long, cold pause. Finally, Aristava spoke, voice lower, barely above a whisper. "They have noticed you." The words settled like lead in the air. The UN chamber, filled with some of the most powerful individuals on Earth, had never been so silent. At that moment, thousands of miles away, deep space observatories picked up something new. A distortion at the edge of the solar system. A shift in gravity, in light itself. Something massive was moving toward Earth. The HRA's luminous form seemed dimmer now, as if they stood in the shadow of something unseen. Aristava looked at the gathered humans with something resembling sorrow. "If you do not accept our help," it murmured, "then nothing will remain." And still, humanity asked the question, "Who are they?" But the HRA would not answer, because to speak of them was to call them closer. Deep space telescopes locked onto the anomaly at the solar system's edge. It was vast, larger than moons, yet it cast no reflection, emitted no light. It was not a ship. It was not an army. It was something else. Something old. Something watching. Human scientists struggled to define it. Instruments failed to measure its mass. Radar pulses vanished without return. The only confirmation of its existence was the void it carved through reality itself. And it was moving, fast. The HRA were no longer composed, no longer serene, enlightened beings they had first presented themselves as. Their golden eyes burned with something terrible, dread. Aristava stood before the UN Council, hands clasped tightly as he delivered the words no one wanted to hear. It is the Unmaker. The room bristled. That name meant nothing to humanity. But the way the HRA spoke it, the way their bodies stiffened, suggested it meant everything to them. The Secretary General leaned forward, voice firm. What is it? Aristava's expression was unreadable. A consumer of civilizations, a force that does not negotiate, does not demand. It arrives, and when it departs, there is nothing left. The U.S. ambassador scoffed. You mean it's a war machine? A fleet? We can fight fleets. You misunderstand, Aristava whispered. It is not a weapon. It is the end. A silence hung over the chamber. For the first time, the HRA looked less like divine protectors and more like refugees from something far beyond their comprehension. We have tried before, Aristava continued. In the long history of the stars, we have seen the rise and fall of 1,000 empires, some greater than yours. All were devoured. The French president frowned. Then how are you still here? Aristava exhaled slowly. Because we learned. The only way to survive is to be silent, to be unseen. A realization dawned. You don't protect civilizations, the Russian delegate said. You hide them. A long pause. Yes. The weight of the admission sank in. The HRA weren't warriors, weren't saviors. They were caretakers of a quiet graveyard, shepherding species into obscurity so that the Unmaker would never find them. The Secretary General's voice was cold. And you expect us to simply disappear? Yes. The chamber erupted. World leaders shouted over one another. Some called for immediate acceptance of the HRA's help. Others condemned the very idea of submission. But amidst the chaos, one voice cut through, strong, unyielding. No, it came from a military commander seated among the diplomats. General Carson, grizzled, worn, but with the unmistakable edge of a man who had seen war and refused to fear it. You say everyone who fought it lost, Carson said, standing. That's because they weren't us. Aristava's eyes narrowed. You cannot fight inevitability. Carson's lips curled into a cold smile. You ever hear of humanity's track record with inevitability? The HRA delegation did not answer. The room shifted. The debate changed. The decision had been made. Earth would not hide. Earth would not run. If something was coming, humanity would meet it head-on. Aristava's voice was soft, almost pleading. You do not understand. It is beyond war, beyond physics. The weapons you wield are meaningless against it. Carson shrugged. Then we'll make better ones. A quiet ripple of approval spread through the human representatives. This was their way. Adversity did not break them. It forged them. The HRA leader looked at them all, his expression unreadable. Then, for the first time, he looked afraid, not of the Unmaker, but of humanity itself. You are making a mistake, he murmured. The Secretary General straightened. Maybe, but it will be ours to make. And as humanity prepared for war, the Unmaker moved ever closer. The world changed overnight. Factories roared to life. Laboratories burned with frantic energy, and militaries across the globe mobilized. Every scientist, engineer, and strategist was given one priority: prepare for the arrival of the Unmaker. Humanity had faced existential threats before, but nothing like this. Satellites tracked the anomaly's advance. It was not merely moving. It was bending space itself, dragging reality behind it like a collapsing wave. Every model suggested the same thing. Earth had less than 2 months before contact. And yet, despite the desperation, despite the warnings of the HRA, there was no fear in the eyes of mankind. There was resolve. The first step was understanding the enemy. Probes were launched, each more advanced than the last. The first vanished without a trace. The second sent back a single frame of distorted data before being erased. The third, however, survived long enough to send back something truly horrifying. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a creature. It was an absence, a shadow carved into existence itself, consuming light, matter, and time in equal measure. And worse, it was adapting. Every attempt to study, it only seemed to refine its approach. The HRA begged humanity to reconsider. "You do not understand what you are provoking," Aristava warned. "It is not something you can outthink. It is not something you can outgun." But humanity had stopped listening. Across the world, weapons were forged unlike any before. Not missiles, not energy cannons, but devices built on the bleeding edge of science. Theoretical physics made real by the sheer force of necessity. Gravitic distorters, zero-point imploders, quantum lattice destabilizers. If the Unmaker defied known physics, then humanity would invent new rules. A coalition formed, unprecedented in history. The United States, China, Russia, and Europe put aside rivalries. Africa, South America, and the Middle East pooled their brightest minds. It was no longer about nations. It was about species survival. The HRA watched with something between awe and horror. "You do not understand," Aristava whispered. "No one has ever fought it and lived." General Carson smirked. "Then it's long overdue." The first test of the new weaponry came within weeks. A prototype singularity bomb was detonated on the dark side of the moon, an artificial black hole, contained for mere seconds before evaporating. It worked. The power to bend reality itself was in humanity's grasp. But time was running out. The Unmaker was at the edge of the solar system now. The HRA fleet began withdrawing, unwilling to stay and witness what they believed to be humanity's final moments. Aristava made one last attempt. "Please," he implored the gathered leaders, "come with us. We will take you beyond its reach. Your people will live, even if Earth does not." The Secretary General stared at him. "And hide forever?" Aristava nodded. The answer was simple. No. And so, as the Unmaker breached Neptune's orbit, humanity made its final preparations. The greatest battle in history was about to begin, and Earth stood alone. The Unmaker arrived. It did not come as an armada. It did not come as a god descending from the heavens. It simply appeared. The space beyond Jupiter twisted, and reality itself seemed to convulse. Stars in the background dimmed. Instruments failed. Every human-built machine pointed at the anomaly flickered, glitched, and died. But Earth had expected that. The first strike came before the Unmaker could react. If it could react at all. Humanity did not send warnings or messages. They did not attempt diplomacy. They simply fired. A fleet of autonomous drones, each carrying experimental payloads, hurled themselves at the anomaly. Gravitic warheads detonated. Space-time buckled, and singularities collapsed into controlled implosions. For the first time in recorded history, something struck the Unmaker, and it noticed. Space itself howled. A silent scream, transmitted not through sound, but through existence itself. Those watching from Earth shuddered as something pressed against reality. Then it moved, not like a fleet, not like an army, but like a concept unraveling. It did not travel through space. It consumed the distance between. Mars ceased to exist. One moment, the red planet stood in the sky. The next, it was gone, not destroyed, not shattered, just erased. Humanity did not stop. A second wave of weapons deployed. This time, reality anchors designed to tether existence itself. They flared against the Unmaker's advance, holding it back for fractions of a second, but fractions were all humanity needed. On Earth, deep beneath Antarctica, the final weapon was being primed. The last argument, a device so powerful, so untested, that its very concept bordered on madness. It was not a bomb. It was not a weapon in any conventional sense. It was a challenge. Scientists had determined that the Unmaker did not destroy. It removed. It rewrote. It was not an entity, but a force, an inevitable tide that consumed civilizations by making them irrelevant. And so, humanity built the one thing it could never erase. A paradox. The last argument would not destroy the Unmaker. It would force it to acknowledge something impossible, something it could not comprehend, a contradiction so absolute that even it could not overwrite it. The Unmaker pressed closer. The gravity of Earth began to shift. Tectonic plates trembled. Then humanity fired its final shot. The last argument activated. Reality screamed. For the first time, the Unmaker hesitated. It had encountered weapons before. It had encountered resistance before. But never this. It tried to erase it. The paradox remained. It tried to consume it. The paradox grew stronger. And then, impossibly, the Unmaker began to collapse. Not in fire, not in destruction, but in contradiction. The fundamental laws it had always obeyed, the inevitability it had always enforced, unraveled. It was a force that had never lost, never stopped, never struggled. And now, it had encountered something it could not consume. Earth refused to be erased. The Unmaker twisted, shrieked in the silence of space, and then it was gone. The solar system was still. The stars burned as they always had. But something had changed. Humanity had not only survived, it had won. The HRA returned days later, expecting to find ruins, expecting to find silence. Instead, they found Earth standing defiant. They found humans unbroken. And for the first time in HRA history, they understood fear. Because the Unmaker had erased 1,000 civilizations, but humanity had erased it.